Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Joining me today is Bill Cunningham, City Planner of Portland, within the Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit about the better housing by design and multifamily zones that the City of Portland is right now in the process of implementing or working their way through. Maybe you can give a little history on kind of how, and I know we've talked before, we've had people from the city talk about the kind of the comprehensive replan or rezone within the city. How does that process kind of start, and then we can maybe get into specifics on this one, let us know where we are, so it would be interesting to hear.
Sure. You're right about this comprehensive rewrite. Just last year we finished the update to our comprehensive plan, which sets the long-range direction for the city. And it sets broad goals like how much we're expecting to grow, what are the kinds of features we want to see as the city develops, and what's important in terms of the way housing happens. And one thing I should highlight is this is all tied to the fact that Portland is a growing city. We're expecting something like 250,000 additional people over the next 20 years, and we're expecting 80% of that growth to be in the form of multifamily housing and other compact housing types.
Okay.
Moving into the future, a lot more people are going to be living in multifamily and other housing, and a lot of concerns about making sure that as we grow, that we're also providing quality environments for where people live.
So the expectation moving forward from a city standpoint is that 80% will be in more of a, I guess I don't want to say traditional multifamily, but more of a higher density type living situation than what we're seeing.
Right.
Got it, okay.
This project, we're calling it the Better Housing by Design project, and it's really focusing on the multifamily zones outside the central city downtown area.
Okay.
And of that large amount of growth, we're expecting about a quarter of it to be in these multifamily zones. And the zones, for those of you who know zones, it's the R3 zone, R2 zone, R1 zone, the RH high density zone, and a pretty broad range of development types in those zones. You've got row houses, townhouses, fourplexes, triplexes, large apartment buildings. So it ranges in scale.
So you've got for sale product, for rent product, ranging from a duplex to a 150 unit high rise type project.
A pretty broad range of things. And the thing that could be confusing for people is that we've had 3 projects going on that are looking at redoing the way we zone for multifamily and other housing development. We had their mixed use zones project that was focusing on some of the commercial corridors like Southeast Division or Williams. And then we also have the residential infill project focusing on the single family zones. So
the RIP program, I think it's the acronym, yes.
So between that single family project, the commercial corridors, and now the multifamily zone, we're basically revamping our whole regulatory approach to housing development in Portland.
I know that we've got the Metro. Does Metro kind of set the ultimate long-term plan, or the bigger, and then each city kind of goes within their long-term plan within the Metro? Kind of how does that work in terms, because we've had people from Metro here speak, talk, and kind of how the planning of those two work together.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum from the state down to the city, and the state has a requirement that the regions of the state provide a 20-year supply of housing.
Got it.
And Metro is in charge of figuring out how that's allocated amongst the Portland area jurisdictions. And so Portland's portion of it, the 120,000 additional housing units, is tended to be Portland's contribution to meeting that 20-year supply.
Goal. Got it.
Right, and there's a lot more to the comprehensive plan too. Part of the idea is where we put our higher density housing should be close to services and transit. It really should be providing environments that provide a positive environment for the people living there. And for this project, we didn't want to focus just on, I think, some of the neighborhood concerns about how it looks in terms of design. We want to think about how the development is working for the residents that live in multifamily. So that's part of what we looked at in this project. But also a key thing, since part of our charge, I should mention that we were funded in part by a Metro grant intended to facilitate needed housing. And Portland's in a housing crisis. We know we need housing. And so part of our charge, which is different from some things, is to look at how we can facilitate development. What we're hearing from some developers is that it is actually easier to do multifamily development in our commercial zones than to do multifamily zoning in our multi-dwelling zones.
And now, why is that? Is that because you're not getting as much pushback from the neighborhoods, or is it why is that? I'm just curious.
There's a lot more flexibility in how we regulate housing in the commercial zones. There's less rigorous requirements for setbacks, and it's more flexible in terms of the density you could do, how many units you could put on a site. And right now, if you're doing a small site in a multifamily zone, there are a lot of setback requirements, really strict numbers of units you can do. And basically, what we heard from developers is that you're saying it's important to provide housing opportunities in these areas, but our regulatory structure often makes it really difficult for that to happen. So, we're trying to respond to a number of things. How do we make it possible to do housing development that's needed in our multifamily zones? But we're also hearing from some parts of town, like East Portland, east of I-205, where we're getting a lot of apartments that had pretty much no outdoor space because we didn't require any, for one thing, and a lot of parking lots. So very often the only place for kids to play is on those parking lots. So we're trying to respond to that too. How do we cultivate development that also is meeting those needs of especially of families? In East Portland, it's definitely an area where there are lots of families with kids and not always a lot of parks nearby. So some of our charges, both trying to see how do we thread the needle between development flexibility, making it easier to do development, but also making sure some of the basics are in place. Another key aspect of this project is, it's part of an East Portland focus. An issue there is we don't have a lot of good street connectivity. We have these super large blocks. It's hard to walk places, and we're partnering with our transportation bureau to find ways of getting more street connections in as part of multi-dwelling development, and to do it in ways that don't cost too much, that aren't too painful for people doing development. What we've heard is that when we do ask for a street, it takes up a lot of site area, it's really expensive, you lose units, and we're looking at change some of those dynamics so we can both get the development and get some of the connections.
So it's kind of a balance between the need of making it easier, but then also not losing the ability, to get kind of those other needed parts within the development.
Right, and I think if you own multifamily housing or do any development, this really will be a fairly broad rewrite of the way development is shaped in our multifamily zones.
So will you look to kind of I want to say maybe cut down on some of the restrictive parts of the old code, which limits, like you said, makes it kind of easier to build multifamily in a commercial zone than it does in a residential zone? Is that kind of one of the ideas, to try to foster more development to ease some of this affordability pressure?
Yes. Okay. We do want to reduce some of those barriers to the housing that we need. But again, it's balanced with things too, such as our goals for making sure development has some integration with the characteristics of neighborhoods. So we're really trying to explore ideas where you can maybe get a mix of both things, both the housing opportunities and trying to respond to some of the community concerns and the need for things like outdoor spaces.
Now, will this be a rezone is this more of a rezone of existing multifamily zone, or is it looking at the city and saying maybe there's pockets that, we're changing the zone type that goes from, industrial to, not industrial, probably not a good example, but some kind of, lower density housing, maybe this is a good corridor or a good spot to do multifamily. Is it changing the zone, or is it just kind of updating the multifamily zone on existing pieces?
It's not changing the mapping of where multifamily zoning is.
It's not, okay.
It's really trying to improve the zoning code tool where it applies in the multifamily zones.
Got it. So then working with the transportation department, we already have, we already know this piece is going to be multifamily. It's just going to be a matter of what's going to be put there in terms of the multifamily zone, or what are they going to be the changes?
And there's definitely a lot of potential for change in these areas. When we've done our analysis in terms of what's there on the ground, the majority of our multifamily zoning land is still in single family. So a lot of opportunity for change in many of the areas where we have that zoning.
So where are we in the process of this program getting implemented? I mean, I know it's been in the works for a while, but maybe you can explain kind of how the process starts, where it goes, and the steps there.
Sure. This project kicked off basically in the summer or fall of 2016.
Okay.
And we've been working on talking to community members, having roundtable discussions with developers and builders to find out what's working well with our code, what needs some fixing, what are some of the things we want to aspire towards. And so that really fed into what we're calling our concept report, which is based on everything we've heard. The concept report identifies what it is we want to achieve, what are some of the changes to the way we regulate things in our zoning code, what we want to have happen. And so that's all done. It could be viewed by anyone interested. And our next step now is getting beyond the basic concepts of what we want to achieve to actually writing the zoning code regulations themselves.
The actual
very detailed
specific code that's in the, okay.
Right. And we're anticipating having a public discussion draft of the specific zoning code language out by probably by early December. And then the next step in that process would be going to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. And that probably be happening around the March timeframe.
Okay.
And then, depending how long that takes, a month after that, it goes to City Council and for their review and approval, if they so choose. And then it becomes effective, usually a minimum of a month after that. So this whole process of working on the concepts, talking to community members, working on the code language, probably the soonest we can have the new zoning code provisions in place would be by mid-2018, but that's absolutely.
That'd be as fast, so 24-month would be very fast track. Right, okay. And so for people that are interested, you can go online to the website below and look at view this report if you want, and there's other information, I'm sure.
Right, and anyone interested in being informed of the evolution of the project and get material, there's a place on our website where you could click and provide information to stay informed.
Okay, and they'll get notifications of when you have meetings.
Right.
Got it. Just curious, what kind of pushback, or what are you, I mean, you have, different stakeholders have different concerns and wants. I mean, what are you hearing? And I'm sure on the development side, it's, the current zoning is very restrictive. Like you said, it's easier to go on the commercial side. What are you hearing from, neighborhoods or things like that? Or is there there's always this kind of fear in Portland specific, nobody wants density in their neighborhood. Mm-hmm. They want affordable housing, but they don't want density. So, I mean, how do you guys kind of work around that kind of delicate situation?
It is a balancing act.
Yeah.
And an example I might give is our most broadly mapped multifamily zone is what we call the R2 zone.
Right.
It's been more of a 2 or 3 story scale townhouse type zone. We have pretty generous height allowances, 40 feet, but unit counts, usually a typical 5,000 square foot residential lot, it's capped at 2 units on that site. We're looking at changing that approach, and instead of limiting it to 2 units, allowing a broader range of units. So we're looking at regulating more by the scale of the building.
I got it. Not by unit, so to speak, more by the scale of the building.
Right, and we use this term called floor to area ratio in planning, and it's an equation related to the size of the site and how much building area it can do. In the R2 zone, for example, it's a 1-to-1 floor area ratio, meaning on that 5,000 square foot lot, you could do 5,000 square feet of building area. And we're looking at setting that cap, but allowing more flexibility for what happens within that 5,000 square feet. So it could be a pair of attached houses or townhouses. It could be a triplex or a fourplex. But one thing we're doing too is rather than the 40 feet of height we had in that zone, we're bringing it down to 35 feet. So it's not so different in scale from our single family development. So more of a big house scale. But within that big house scale, saying we're open to whatever will fit.
So was that more of a give to the quote the neighborhoods that are anti-development or anti-density to say, okay, we'll cut down the height from 45 to 30, but for doing that we're not, we've got to be able to put more than 2 units on these lots if we want. Okay. And
what this is related to too, there had been a lot of discussion about what some called middle housing or the missing middle. And we looked at some of the pre-World War II housing from the 1910s and 20s. If you go to some of Portland's older neighborhoods, you'll have a lot of these triplexes, fourplexes, courtyard apartments mixed in with single-family neighborhoods. They're usually no more than 2 or 3 stories. And when we looked at our code, we found that most of that housing could not be built today. It didn't meet the unit count calculation. So what we're trying to do is provide a situation where that same zone could allow a duplex or fourplex or fiveplex, but within that same scale. So it would really open things up to a different approach to the way development happens.
Well, I don't envy your position because I know everybody has, like I said, a different stake in this, I don't want to call it fight, but this kind of where things laid out in the city. I think we all agree that bringing more supply would help alleviate some of the affordability issues that we're having within the city. And just, we just had a state economist in and we were talking about the immigration, and we're just not able, if we get this kind of immigration, we're talking, on an annual basis, we need to bring, 15,000 units, either single family or multifamily, to handle that's a demand. And with the current zoning, we're just not going to be able to get that done. So I mean, I applaud the city for going through this, and hopefully addressing some of the issues, like you said, when you've got developers saying it's easier to develop in commercial multifamily than it is in a multifamily zone. Is probably not where we want to be in trying to bring more supply to the market.
Right, and we're trying to be responsive to some market dynamics too. We've heard from some developers, for example, that small development, 4 units or less, you can get residential financing for it versus a commercial loan.
Right.
And some of our approaches, the missing middle thing for more units on that small site, could really work with that financing structure. So I think we're really trying to avoid in this project working in a void where you're not thinking about how the regulations interplay with the considerations of developers or people involved with the property industry.
Well, that's good. I wish everything did like that. It just seems like there's been some decisions made in a void that they don't really look at how that's going to affect the market dynamics or how the market works, and then we're unwinding these unintended consequences. And so hopefully this plan is laid out in a way that again, you can't make everybody happy, but remember what the goal is and how do we bring more housing.
Yeah, I might mention a few other things
Sure.
that might be a bit of a bite into the way things happen with property development. As I mentioned, we have a situation, especially in East Portland, where we have a lot of family housing, but no outdoor spaces.
Right.
In our high density RH zone, which right now requires no outdoor space, we're looking at putting in a requirement for including some outdoor space. And for larger sites, which we're defining as 20,000 square feet or larger, we're putting in a requirement for a required common area, which we're looking at maybe 10% of the site area being in some sort of common space or indoor community.
Could it be
facility.
Indoor though? It can be enclosed.
Yep.
So the community
or a
room.
mix.
Okay, could be a mix.
Right, and so
Right.
that's really trying to respond to that fact that we have a lot of areas that really need that more immediate connection to
Right.
outdoor spaces or community rooms that is not getting it. Usually our upscale places closer in, the market's providing that anyway.
Yes.
The Pearl District is full of condos and apartments that have courtyards.
Right. Courtyards, decks, rooftop decks, common area spaces. But you go out to East County, you've got 70 properties that are or 1990, early 2000s that are just basically a building with a parking lot and very little common area at all. So
I think another example where we're trying to think both of green type spaces and flexibility is related to the way we regulate some things like recently we have eco roofs happening where you have vegetated roofs, or you'll sometimes have a courtyard with some landscaping or planters. And it had been a long time since we last wrote our zoning code, back in the 90s or so, and none of those things existed. And currently requirements are that if we require landscaping, and it always has to be at ground level in the ground. And we had a builder who was wanting to do some courtyard housing where he did some parking and capped it with a courtyard with plantings and went to do eco roofs, but none of that counted towards our landscaping requirements.
because it wasn't on the ground.
Yeah, it had to be on the ground.
Got it.
And we would be changing that so that a greater variety of green elements really couldn't count towards our regulations.
Oh, good. So kind of looking at where the zoning is and what, stuff that was done 10, 20 years ago may not be, kind of in vogue, not even vogue, but not really in practice now. So try to get the zoning code more in line with what's being done, in the marketplace.
Right.
Oh, good.
But as I mentioned, it's a balancing act, kind of threading a needle between some flexibility, but some requirements to get some of the most important basics. And as we're going through this process, anyone who has a knowledge of how these things end up playing out in the real world, we'd love to have people take a look at our proposals because I think that will be important to make sure we're continuing to get some real world feedback on the way things might work.
Great. Well, thank you for coming. Again, if people want information, just go to the website below. I think community involvement is very important in these kind of policies, where we can have policies made and zoning codes made with the feedback of people that are dealing with it on a daily basis. Like you said, getting feedback from developers to kind of the challenges they're having in delivering housing. If we can ease that and make these things more sustainable and make it easier as a process, we can deliver more housing, which I think would be a goal for everybody in the kind of market that we're in. So again, I appreciate you coming and explaining that. And we look forward to having you again on HFO-TV. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you.
That was great.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.